your EMT license. And he was carrying a firearm.
Was one of the reasons that you assumed he was 18 the fact that he was carrying a firearm?
Correct.
Why is that?
Which under objection calls for a legal conclusion.
What he's testified to is his understanding of the law. It's not to be taken as a statement about what the law is. It's a statement of what the witness believes the law to be. So your objection is overruled.
Do you remember the question?
Of why I assumed he was 18.
What did the gun have to do with it? The fact that he's possessing a gun, why did that make you think he was 18?
Because you have to be 18 in order to buy a firearm, a long gun in Wisconsin.
Did there come a time while you were at the 59th Street car source where you observed an individual that you now know to be Joseph Rosenbaum?
Yes.
How many times that night did you observe that person?
Just the one incident.
Can you tell us what you observed?
He had been, how do I say this? Acting very belligerently. Like, he had asked very bluntly to shoot him. He did a few what I would call false stepping, which is making a step to entice somebody to do something. He had done that a few times. After he'd done that a few times, I turned my back to him and ignored him.
What did you think of him?
A babbling idiot.
Did you consider him a threat?
No.
Did you feel that he posed any danger to you or anyone else?
No.
How tall are you?
I am 5'10".
Do you have an estimate as to how tall Mr. Rosenbaum was?
Not really. He was bent over.
How was he dressed at that time, if you recall?
He had something red over his face, no shirt, and he had a bag in his hand.
A plastic bag?
Yes.
Were you able to get a look at that bag?
No.
You said that he was asking someone to shoot him?
Correct.
Was he saying that to you?
He said that to me, and he said that, I believe, to multiple others.
Something along the lines of, shoot me, shoot me. Would that be fair to say?
There was more explicit terms after that, yes, but yes.
Did you see him with any sort of weapon?
Outside of that bag, no.
Did you see him with a gun?
No.
Did you see him with a knife?
No.
Did you see him with a club or a bat of any kind?
No.
Did you see him with a chain?
No.
You indicated that he was false stepping. Would you mind standing up on the main floor here and physically demonstrate for us what you're talking about? Yes, please. For the record, if you allow me, I'll go ahead and see it. I'm going to try and describe what you just demonstrated for us physically so we've got a good record here. You're standing still and then sort of taking 1 foot, maybe 2 to 3 feet ahead, stepping forward with that foot and sort of almost pushing your chest out towards that other person and then withdrawing that same foot again and repeating that a couple of times. Would that be a fair description
Yes.
of what you just did? When you said that this individual was doing that, was he doing it towards you?
In my general direction.
Was there anyone else around you that he was doing that to also?
There was an individual to my right and to my left. I don't recall who they were.
Do you know if those were other individuals that were guarding that car source location?
They were, yes.
Do you know if any of them was the defendant?
I don't recall.
At the time that you had this interaction with Mr. Rosenbaum, were you armed?
Yes.
Can you tell us how you were armed?
I had my weapon slung and pointed to the ground.
When you say your weapon, you mean your AR-15?
Correct.
Was there a sling around your body that the weapon was attached to?
Yes.
And when you say the gun was pointed to the ground, was that in such a way where the butt was maybe at the middle of your chest and then
You'll be facing like this.
at an angle?
Correct.
Okay. So the butt is sort of at an angle towards one of your shoulders, and the barrel is downward at maybe a 45-degree angle or thereabouts?
Yes.
Did you have any other weapons other than that AR-15 that night?
I had my knife.
Anything else?
I had a CS gas canister.
What is a CS gas canister?
It is a deterrent. It's like pepper spray, but a lot more potent.
Is that also commonly referred to as tear gas?
Yes.
Or is there a technical difference between
There's
the two?
a technical difference, but for the records, yes, tear gas.
Where did you physically have that canister located on your body?
In my dump pouch.
Did you say dump?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a pouch that you put on your opposite side to put empty magazines in.
Okay. Was there ever a time in which you pulled that canister out to use it?
When the protesters had pushed my way and started causing a ruckus, I had put it on a car in front of me because I needed to use it.
You put it in a place where you could get at it if you needed it. After you put it on that car, did you ever grab a hold of it with the intent of getting it ready to be
I'm
used?
pretty sure it fell off the car.
Where did that CS gas canister come from?
An individual, I think his name's Dustin. I don't recall his actual name. It starts with a D.
Is that one of the other individuals that was there at that location?
Yes.
So you had the AR-15, the knife, and the CS gas canister. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
Did you have any other weapons on you?
No.
I know we've talked a little bit about the false stepping that Mr. Rosenbaum was doing, and you said there were two other individuals, one on either side of you. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you able to tell us if Mr. Rosenbaum was doing this directly at any one of the
It
three
was
of
just
you?
in our general direction.
How far away was he from you when that was going on?
I want to say a max of 6 feet.
Did he ever touch you?
No.
Did he ever threaten to harm you?
Outside of his banter, no.
When you say his banter, what specifically in his banter did you construe as a threat to harm you?
I really didn't see him as a threat at all, to be honest with you. But it would be his false stepping and his banter saying, shoot me, explicit term.
Did you interpret him saying, shoot me, as a threat to you?
No.
Did you interpret it as a threat to anyone else?
No.
How long did Mr. Rosenbaum continue this behavior before you turned your back on him and walked away?
I'm not sure, but it wasn't very long. He had done it maybe 1 or 2 times, and I just ignored it.
Do you recall putting out any fires that night?
Multiple, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
The first one I put out, it was just north of the car lot. Somebody had set up a deliberate barrier and set what you'd call like a campfire behind it and set it on fire to deliberately set fire to the barrier.
I want to make sure I understand that. You said they set up a small barrier.
It was a rather large barrier. It was taller than I was. It was a wooden structure.
Do you know what type of wooden structure it was?
It was just a rickety structure. I don't recall.
Do you know where it came from?
No.
Did you see any of the individuals who started the fire?
No.
Do you recall where that was located in relation to the 59th Street car source lot?
That was just in front of the church, or the demolished church.
There's actually a little laser pointer in front of you. There's a button on the side, and when you point that, could you use that and point on the map where that fire was?
Right there.
And I just want to narrate for the record, that appears to be a location, was that on Sheridan Road?
Yes.
North of 59th, closer to 58th Street. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
What did you do in response to that fire?
I stomped it out.
With your feet?
Yes.
Did you use any sort of fire extinguisher or water?
No.
What happened after you did that?
After that, I had walked back to the car lot.
You mentioned there were other fires you put out?
Yes.
Tell us about those.
There was a few after the incident. There was one on the this car lot. There was a pickup truck that the interior was on fire. Then I had found a fire extinguisher next to it. I had put that one out. And then there was another one that I couldn't put out because the fire extinguisher was spent. So there was cars around it. It was myself and another individual. I pushed cars away from that.
I believe you said those two fires were after the incident.
Yes.
What incident are you referring to?
The incident with, I don't want to, the incident with Kyle.
The shootings?
Yes.
I want to try and keep this in chronological order as best we can. So if we can just go back for a minute to the 59th Street car source. While you were at that location, other than the barrier in the street that you've described, did you put out any other fires around that area?
No.
Do you remember a time in which there was a dumpster on fire out in the street?
I don't recall, no.
And I believe you said other than the one interaction with the false stepping, you didn't have any observations or contact with Mr. Rosenbaum at any other time that night?
Correct.
We've heard a lot of testimony and seen videos of what we now know to be the shootings. And I think everybody's got a good idea now with hindsight of the sequence of those events. But what I want to ask you is, on that particular night, do you remember hearing or observing those shootings?
I remember hearing gunfire, yes.
Where were you located when you heard that?
At the car lot on 59th and Sheridan.
The original one that we've been talking
Yes.
about? From what direction did you hear those shots coming from?
From the south.
What did you do, if anything?
Ran toward them.
That would be running, and I'm going to use the pointer here, that would be running in a direction from the car source at 59th and Sheridan, south on Sheridan Road?
Correct.
Do you remember encountering a line of armored police vehicles?
I don't recall.
Tell us what you remember. When you heard those gunshots and started running, tell us what you remember about that.
There was myself and another individual. I believe his name is Dustin. I don't remember his actual name. Him and I ran down there. Once I got down there, I was by myself. I don't know where he went. And then I got to the corner of the lot, which there's an alleyway there, and then the lot, there's a fence line. And then from there, Mr. Rittenhouse came up to me. He had said, I don't remember exactly what he had said, but he had said something to me. And then I had told him to run toward the police, which he did. I had followed him a little ways, but then there was gunfire behind me. So I turned around to attempt to assess that, and then once again there was gunfire behind me. And at that point, that is when, I'm pretty sure I blacked out. I don't remember anything after that.
You said you're pretty sure you blacked out?
Yes, because I don't remember anything. The next thing I remember is helping out with Gage.
Okay. I want to try and break that down if we can. You indicated that at some point as you were running south on Sheridan, you encountered the defendant.
Yes.
Are you able to show us on that map where that encounter occurred?
About right there.
and you've pointed to a location which is on the west side of Sheridan Road. It appears to be right at the boundary between that 63rd Street car source and the property that is located just to the north of that on the
Yes.
west. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. How did the defendant appear to you?
Frazzled. In shock.
Did he have his weapon?
Yes.
Where do you know where he came from?
He ran from the car lot.
Were you still running at that point?
At that point, when I linked up with him, I stopped.
When you stopped, did you come in close proximity with the defendant?
Yes.
Did you say anything to him, if you recall?
I don't recall.
And I think you indicated earlier you don't remember what he said to you.
I do not.
Now, do you remember after this night speaking with the FBI?
Yes.
And that conversation occurred about a week later?
Yes.
And do you remember telling them what the defendant had said to you?
I remember telling them yes.
If I showed you a copy of that statement, would that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor? Mr. Okowski, I'm going to hand you the statement, and there's a portion here that is marked, and I would like you to take a look at that. Take as much time as you need, and when you're done looking at it, please look up.
Okay.
I'm going to take that back from you now. Does that refresh your memory as to what you told the FBI?
Yes.
And does it refresh your memory as to what the defendant said to you when you encountered him?
He had indicated that he had shot somebody.
According to your statement, Mr. Lukowski, you're...
Sorry, did not shoot anybody. I apologize.
Okay.
I apologize.
Just want to make that clear.
Did not shoot anybody.
When the defendant spoke to you, he said he didn't shoot anyone.
Correct.
But he said he needed help.
Yes.
What did you tell him, if
I
anything?
told him to run to the police that were down the road.
What did you do then?
At that point, he started running. I followed him.
Let me pause for a second, and I just want to make sure we get our directions correct. What direction did the defendant run from there?
From here, that way. So north.
North on Sheridan. And did you run in that same direction?
Yes.
What happened then?
And then there was gunshots behind me.
And when you say behind you, are you meaning back down south?
Yes.
What did you do then?
I stopped and turned around.
Where did you go?
I was in place because it felt like seconds after there was more gunshots behind me, which would have been to the north.
And that would have been the direction that the defendant had been running.
Yes.
Is that the moment in time when you feel like you kind of blacked out?
Yes.
And I think you said the next thing you remember is Mr. Grosskreutz?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I remember being on the sidewalk, and then there was an individual on the ground screaming. I had walked up to them with a group of individuals. Somebody was screaming for a tourniquet, I believe. So I had given an individual, I believe his name is CJ, I don't actually know if that's his name. I had given that to him. He had applied the tourniquet. He had done it wrong. So I had pushed him out of the way, applied it correctly for the most part, and I stayed with Gage until police showed up.
What happened then?
And then the police showed up, told me to back off. I backed off. Once he was in the vehicle, I had noticed an individual saying that there was a gun on the ground. He had pointed to it and started walking toward it. I pushed him out of the way. I had picked up said firearm. I dropped the magazine and emptied the chamber.
I want to make sure the record is clear. You said someone was put inside a vehicle. The he is Gage. Gage Grosskreutz?
Yes.
And then there was you said a gun on the ground. What type of gun was it?
It was a Glock.
A pistol?
Yes.
After you took care of neutralizing or disarming the gun, what did you do next?
The police had come up to me and told me to put it down, and then I had walked toward the sidewalk, and then I believe I had headed south toward the car lot.
What happened then?
There was a bunch of reporters, I guess, over there talking to people, and wait, no. Is that why I put out the fires? I don't recall. I don't want to mix up my story.
Understood. You mentioned that you dealt with a fire in a truck
Yes.
at the car source location?
Yes.
And found a fire extinguisher?
Yes.
Are you able to show us on the map where that occurred?
Yes. About right there.
You are pointing to a location that is on the 63rd Street car source lot near the northeast corner of that lot. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Where did you find the fire extinguisher?
Laying right next to the truck.
And the fire, you said, was inside the truck?
Yes.
Inside the passenger compartment?
Yes.
What did you do after putting that fire out, if you recall?
I put that fire out. There was another fire that was just on the opposite side of the building. There was a car on fire, and then the fire extinguisher was spent, so I couldn't use that, but there were cars around it, so it was myself and another individual, I don't recall who that individual was, had pushed, I believe, 2 vehicles away from it, so it didn't catch fire on those.
In the sequence of events that you've just described, beginning with hearing the gunshots when you were at 59th Street all the way down to where we just left off, did you encounter Ryan Balch at any time?
Yes.
Do you remember when and where that was?
No. But I know that I did encounter with him.
Do you remember when you were at the car source lot at 63rd Street being with Mr. Balch?
When I was putting out the fires, no.
After that, at that location?
After that, yes.
You mentioned some reporters down at the 63rd Street car source. Did you speak with them?
I avoided them as much as I could.
But is it fair to say that there were a number of them around you with cameras
Yes.
asking pictures? Or asking questions, rather?
Yes.
And they were also asking questions of Mr. Balch?
Correct.
During that process, did anyone show you an image or a video of the person who was suspected to have committed these shootings?
No, because they thought it was me.
Those people thought it was you?
Yes.
When did you first learn that it was the defendant?
I don't recall.
Was there a time when you were speaking with those reporters that you learned that the person who was suspected to have done these shootings was the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that those reporters were asking you who that person was?
They were asking me if I was the one that had done it, because they were looking for a tall white individual with an AR-15 wearing a green shirt. And that's what I was wearing.
There were also people that were saying that the shooter was with your group.
Yes.
At that time when they were saying that to you, you knew that was true, correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you didn't volunteer that information at that time?
I did not.
Were there police cars nearby at that moment in time?
I believe there was a police blockade on the west side of, I think, 63rd Street.
Did you ever approach any of the police that night and tell them what you knew?
No.
After dealing with the things that you dealt with at 63rd Street car source, where did you go?
We had gotten, Ryan and myself had gotten into my truck, and we drove toward the other car lot to pick up a firearm and I believe his cell phone that was inside the building.
Whose property was that?
That was
No, I mean the
Cars.
cell phone and the gun. Who did those belong to?
Ryan.
What happened when you got to the 59th Street car source?
It was locked and there was nobody there.
Mr. Lukowski, I want to go back to the beginning of your night. You indicated that you arrived at that location around 10:45 p.m., and we talked a little bit about your interactions with the defendant. Did you bring along any medical supplies with you that night?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Just in case it was needed.
I didn't hear you.
Just in case it was needed.
Did you interact with the defendant with regard to those medical supplies?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
He had said he was an EMT. I said that if he needed anything to let me know, and then he had asked, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he had said something, and then I remember giving him my flashlight, turning around, and him digging through my med bag.
I'm not sure I heard that word. You said digging through your med
Digging
bag?
through my med bag, yeah.
Was that the defendant doing that?
Yes.
Did he take any medical supplies from you?
I don't recall what he actually took. But yes, he did take some medical supplies from my bag.
Do you remember speaking to the FBI about those medical supplies?
Yes.
If I showed you a copy of your statement, would it refresh your memory as to what the supplies were?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor? Mr. Lukowski, I'm going to show you your statement. At the bottom of the first page, there's some items marked. Please look those over, and when you're done, look up. And it may continue on to the next page.
Okay.
I'm going to take that back. Did that refresh your memory as to the medical supplies that the defendant borrowed from you?
Yes.
What were those specific items?
A quick clot, a bandage, and what you'd call a vitamin pack, which has a bunch of random stuff in it.
What is quick clot?
It is something that you use to stop bleeding. Severe bleeding.
Quick clot. Were you aware at that time what sort of medical supplies, if any, the defendant already had on him?
I was not aware, no.
One second, please. I have no further questions.
Cross-examine.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it fair to say that prior to August 25th, you had never laid eyes on Kyle Rittenhouse?
Correct.
Okay. After August 25th, have you ever spoken to Kyle Rittenhouse?
No.
So you didn't know who he was when you got there, and you haven't talked to him since.
Correct.
And you had made mention when speaking to Attorney Binger about shout, shove, show, shoot, right?
Yes.
Okay. In anywhere in that kind of commands that you do, is run away or retreat? Is that in there?
No.
So if you shout at someone and make physical contact or show them your firearm and they're still coming forward, have you ever been trained to
No.
head for the hills?
No.
Run away from them?
No.
Try to get yourself out of the situation that you're in?
No.
You watched the video. Have you watched the videos in this case?
I have watched several, yes.
Okay. Have you watched the video at Car Source at 63rd?
Not in its entirety, no.
Okay. So, have you or have you not seen what Mr. Rittenhouse did prior to the shooting?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, you saw Mr. Rosenbaum. Did you see Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Rittenhouse running through the parking lot?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. So you arrive at 59th Street Car Source 10:45-ish,
Around, yes.
and you have an AR-15 and a medical pack with you?
Correct.
Okay. Same kind of situation that when you meet Mr. Rittenhouse that he has, right? He has an AR-15.
To a sense, yes.
you have more than he has, but you both are carrying a medical pack.
Yes.
And he goes through some of your things, your medical things, and takes things that he needs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yep. And you see him that night.
Correct.
And he is, when you speak to him, you get his name and the EMT information.
Correct.
Is that about it?
Yes.
You see him that night out and about trying to actually help people.
Correct.
Do you see him that night threaten anyone?
No.
Do you see him being aggressive in any manner toward anyone?
No.
You, I'm going to ask if you could take a peek at exhibit number 40. Can you tell me, do you know who that is a picture of?
Joseph Rosenbaum.
Now, do you remember seeing him that evening, the 25th?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't know his name,
No.
but was his behavior such that made you remember him?
Yes.
All right. So can you? What's that?
But it's not showing anything. It's showing
Mr. Lakowski, I'm going to ask you one other question about this. You said you see Mr. Rosenbaum in that picture, right?
Yes.
Okay. There's a person behind Mr. Rosenbaum as well. Is that right?
Yes.
We agree that's Joseph Simmons.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Josh Simmons.
I'm sorry, Joshua Simmons. Do you recognize or do you remember seeing the person behind Mr. Rosenbaum?
No.
You don't remember seeing Mr. Simmons? Okay. Now, you had said that Mr. Rosenbaum was yelling at people.
Yes.
Okay. And he's yelling in a crowd of people, right? We're talking about the Ultimate gas station.
No.
You remember seeing him at the Ultimate gas station or not?
No.
So where did you see him in particular?
I saw him on the corner of 59th and Sheridan.
And when he was on, tell me if this is fair, when he's on the corner of 59th and Sheridan, he is yelling, "Shoot me," and then he uses the N-word.
Yes.
So he's saying, "Shoot me, N-word, shoot me, N-word."
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And to set the backdrop here, he's saying this at a protest for an African-American man who was shot by police.
Correct.
And while he's saying, "Shoot me, N-word," do you remember people behind yelling or chanting, "Black Lives Matter"?
I don't recall.
Do you remember that night hearing people saying, "Black
Yeah.
Lives Matter"?
Yes.
Okay. Are people reacting to him?
In a negative
Hold on.
manner.
Are they reacting to him when he's screaming the N-word at a Jacob Blake protest?
In a negative manner, yes.
Okay.
I didn't hear you. In a what manner?
In a negative.
Okay.
In a negative manner, yes.
How?
Stepping away from him.
Okay, so they're separate, if I have it right. They're trying to disassociate themselves with the guy screaming racial epithets at a Black Lives Matter rally.
Yes.
And you had said that he is, now I'll ask you this. At 59th Street, are there other people around?
Yes.
So it's not a situation, you had said that you didn't feel threatened.
Correct.
It wasn't a situation, though, where you were one-on-one with Mr. Rosenbaum, was it?
It was not correct.
Okay, so there's other people, are there other people that are protecting the business there as well?
Yes.
Okay, so you have support, for lack of a better term.
Yes.
And you had said that, well, let me ask you this. You said you didn't view him as a threat. Would that have changed at all if you were alone with him?
No,
You didn't view him as a threat?
not at all.
Did he ever threaten to kill you?
No,
Did he ever say to you, if I get you alone, you're dead?
no,
You said that he was false stepping towards you, right?
yes,
Okay. Did he ever do more than that? Did he ever come actually after you?
no,
If he would have done that, would have made you more concerned?
situation dictates.
Okay. Well, if I'm false stepping on you, okay, would you be more concerned instead of me false stepping if I'm coming full speed right at you?
Yes,
Fair, right? I mean,
Yes.
I'm then in your personal space, and you have a gun too, right?
yes,
So one of the things I could do is take that gun from you.
yes,
Try to.
yes,
And if I threatened to kill you if I saw you that night, and then I'm running full speed at you and I'm going for your gun, are those all things you would have considered when making a decision what to do against somebody like me?
a threat to my life, yes.
Now, you had mentioned that people were throwing chlorine gas bombs. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. I don't know if we've ever actually established what one of those is. It's a homemade device.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell me what you saw that night in terms of these homemade gas bombs?
A water bottle with substance in it. You shake it up, throw it, and then it gets to a point where it explodes because of the chemical reaction.
Okay, and then does it release some form of gas?
Yes,
And were you guys on 59th Street getting hit with those?
yes,
And you were also getting hit with, now you say rocks. There's been testimony that people were taking chunks of concrete or cement, breaking them on the ground and throwing those.
yes,
Is that fair?
yes,
Okay, so I know rocks come in different shapes and sizes, but we're talking about chunks of concrete, yes?
yes, sir.
All right. And I think you had mentioned in your statement to the FBI that Mr. Rosenbaum was one of the most aggressive people that you had encountered that night.
Yes,
And is that true? Are you
yes,
that has stood the test of time in terms
Yes.
of your recollections? Yes?
yes,
Okay. There was some conversation that you had with Attorney Binger about your interaction with Kyle on on Sheridan Road as he's running north.
yes.
He never stops running, correct?
He stopped running to talk to me.
For how long?
I couldn't tell you the time span.
Okay, well, I want to see if we can do this. Is it minutes?
It seemed like seconds.
Okay. Are there people behind him running after him?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you hear anything of people yelling?
At one point, somebody did shout, "Get him."
All right. So I'm going to show you if I can, and it only works on this video, so Judge, do you mind if he steps?
Go ahead.
Sorry. If you can, well, if we can do it. All right, perfect.
Supposed to be an HDMI or document.
Yeah, it says out of order.
So Tom, yeah, thank you. This is the so. Okay. Judge, I have marked this video as 41. I don't think there's an objection from the state to move it into evidence.
May I see it?
Yeah, this is just the front page of the. This is all I have. We're going to move the video eventually, but this is the.
It's the
front
identifying
page. Yeah,
document
yes,
for the video. Go ahead. Received.
Slightly forward here, or
No, you can.
No. Well, okay. It's your. The defendant cannot currently see the screen. Oh, it's up now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll stay out of it.
There's a screen there too.
I'll stay out of it. Okay. Oh, and he's got one there.
Judge Rogan.
All right.
Okay.
All right, we got. Take screenshots. That dude shot him. That nigga just shot that dude. Cranium that boy. He just shot a man.
Are you in this video? Can you tell?
I can't tell.
Are you, from your recollection, are you walking south on Sheridan Road at that time?
Yes.
Okay. So, is this about the location where you made contact with Mr. Rittenhouse, if you remember?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. Can you play the video? Is that you right there, Mr. Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Okay, so you have a brief conversation with Mr. Rittenhouse, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, can you play it for one more second? Okay, and I'm not being critical. You keep walking then north on Sheridan?
Yes.
Okay. And you heard on the tape things like people saying cranium that boy, right? Cranium, like your head? Cranium that boy.
On the
right?
tape, yes.
Do you recall hearing that evening?
No.
Okay. Now, you had told the FBI that Mr. Rittenhouse said to you, I didn't shoot anybody, but I need help.
Yes.
Now, you'd agree, well, tell me if you'd agree. The statement that makes more sense is, I did shoot somebody and I need help. Right? Why would he need help if he didn't shoot someone? Right?
Yes.
Okay. So, again, I'm not being critical. How certain are you that in fact he didn't say, I did shoot someone and I need help, versus I didn't shoot someone, but I need help?
I don't honestly recall.
Okay. Are you after Mr. Rittenhouse leaves you and is running north on Sheridan Road, do you hear or see, if you recall, any of the people that are yelling at him and running toward him? Do you remember seeing and hearing that?
Yes, there was some individuals running toward him. At least they were running to the north.
Do you remember hearing them talking or yelling at him or not?
Outside of individuals saying, get him, no.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Outside of an individual saying, get him, no.
Okay, so you at least heard one person yell, get him.
Yes.
And is it at that point then that you kind of, I think you told Mr. Binger, at that point you had kind of blacked out?
Yes.
Okay, and can you tell us what that means to you?
It's when you just go through the motions. I guess it's when your body just goes through the motions, and you're kind of like the lights on, nobody's home, kind of deal. It's when your body hits to a certain point of stress to where it just goes through the motions.
Okay, so in high stressful situations, your recollection of events for you becomes difficult.
Yes.
At least in this situation.
In this scenario, yes.
And you you make, or then what you recall is making contact with Gage Grosskreutz.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have that photo? I'm sorry? Now, do you remember where you made contact with him? Are you on Sheridan Road?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember the location? If you look at the map, does that help you? So this is 63rd, and that's 59th, up next from St. James Church. Do you remember where you are?
Oh, just before the intersection.
Okay. And that's a picture of Mr. Grosskreutz, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in that picture, he's holding a black pistol.
Yes.
Does that appear to be, or look, I can't say does it appear to look like the pistol that you located on the ground?
Yes.
All right. That pistol that you located on the ground, you had said I'm going to use your term. You dumped the magazine, right?
I had dropped the magazine, then cleared the chamber. Yes.
Dropped. So the magazine is the, for lack of a better term, if we see TV or whatever, it's the thing that goes into the grip of the gun that holds bullets, right?
Correct.
Okay. And there was a magazine with bullets in there?
Correct.
And then you said you cleared the chamber. What
Correct.
does that mean?
It's when you take the top of the slide and rack it back.
Okay, so like you'll see on television or whatever, they pull it back and then the bullet can fly out?
Correct.
Does there have to be a bullet in the chamber to fire the gun?
Yes.
Was there a bullet in that chamber?
Yes.
So, in your training and experience with firearms, was that gun ready to be fired?
Yes.
So, in the past with some witnesses, Mr. Binger has asked them if they had shot anyone that night. And what I want to do is just ask you a couple questions about you that night, okay? Fair to say, no one verbally threatened to kill you, did they?
Not that I recall, no.
No one actually chased you, did they?
Not that I recall, no.
Did anybody ever say to you, forgive me, you won't do shit, motherfucker?
No.
No one ever said that
No.
to you? Did anybody ever, well, were you alone at various times that evening?
Yes.
Okay. And you have military training?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever feel there was a situation where somebody had kind of snuck up on you or ambushed you that night?
No.
Is it fair to say the reason that you didn't use your firearm that night is nobody had attacked you that night, right?
There was no need for it.
Now, after the shooting, you had said that you put out a truck that was on fire by Car Source.
Yes.
We call it Car Source 3, but it's Car Source on 63rd.
Yes.
And that, by happenstance, there was a fire extinguisher located close to that?
Yes.
Did you ever see Kyle walking back toward the police line on 60 or on 59th or 60th here? Did you ever see him walking back this direction after you had contact with him down here?
No.
Okay, so you don't know what happened after that?
No.
I just have one or two more questions for you. I just want to make sure that we're clear on your contact or interaction with Mr. Rosenbaum. Now, you had said that you had witnessed people pushing a lit dumpster in the road. Is that right?
I did not know.
You did not see that?
No.
Okay. Were you ever at the Ultimate gas station then?
I walked past it, talked to some individuals there, and then just kept on my merry way.
Okay, so the contact, when you heard Mr. Rittenhouse Mr. Rosenbaum screaming the racial epithets and saying, "Shoot me," it wasn't at this location,
No.
It was at another location?
Correct.
Okay. So can I ask you this? When you left for the evening, you had driven down there, right?
Correct.
Was your vehicle damaged?
Yes.
How?
I had a smashed back window and a smashed front windscreen.
Sorry, front.
Windscreen or windshield. Yeah.
Okay. So you drove back to wherever you were with a smashed up vehicle?
Yes.
I think I just have one more question. So, if I can ask you this, Mr. Wachowski, is that the fire extinguisher, if you recall, that you used to put out the fire in the truck that's next to it?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have, Judge. Thank you.
How much redirect do you have?
10 minutes.
All right, let's take a break. Please don't talk about please don't talk about the case during the break. Read, watch, or listen when they count of the trial. Binger?
Hello?
Would you come down, please?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Binger.
Mr. Lukowski, I just have a few follow-up questions after Attorney Chirafisi had questioned you. At any point in that evening, did you receive a report that you or other folks guarding 59th Street needed to go down to 63rd to put out a fire?
No.
Or to deal with any sort of property damage at that location?
No.
So when you decided to go down there in the end, it was simply because you heard gunshots?
Yes.
You were asked about your FBI statement regarding what you heard the defendant say.
Yes.
That was a statement that you gave to the FBI on September 1st of 2020. Does that sound right?
Yes.
That would have been about 6 or 7 days after the incident occurred?
Yes.
Was your memory of what occurred on the night of August 25th fresher in your mind at the time you spoke to the interview than it is today?
Correct.
When you spoke with the FBI, did they identify themselves as law enforcement agents?
Yes.
Did you understand that they were there to ask you about what had happened on the night of August 25th?
Yes.
At that time, did you know that 2 people had been killed that night?
Yes.
Did you feel that you had a responsibility to cooperate with the investigation?
Yes.
Did you feel like you wanted to be as open and honest with the FBI agents as possible?
Yes.
Did you feel like you wanted to give them as much information as you could about the events of that night?
Yes.
When you spoke to them, did you tell them the truth?
Yes.
Did you understand that if you lied to law enforcement, that that would potentially be criminal activity?
Yes.
And when you spoke to the FBI, you were clear with them about what the defendant had said to you when you met him on the street. Is that right?
At that point, when I recollected, yes.
The reason I ask that is because
You don't need to explain.
Sure. When Attorney Chirafisi was asking you, I think you said you weren't sure, as you sit here today, what the defendant said. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Is that because over the last 14 months, some of the details are no longer as clear to you as they were when you spoke to the FBI on September 1st, 2020?
Yes.
Your statement to the FBI, where you told them Rittenhouse's face was pale white, and he stated that he didn't shoot anyone but needed help. That was accurate, correct?
Yes.
It was accurate that he stated that, or that was accurate as the fact?
Do you
It was
understand?
accurate that I had stated that at that point in time, yes.
And was that, in fact, what the defendant had said to you?
From what I recollect at that point in time, yes.
You characterized Mr. Rosenbaum and the way people around him were reacting to him, and I think you used the word they were disassociating from him. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Did you see anyone else that appeared to be friendly towards Mr. Rosenbaum, or somebody that he was in association with or accompanying that night?
Not that I recall, no.
Did he appear to be solo?
Not that I recall.
I'm a little confused, so help me understand. Did he appear to be in the company of any other people?
I was confused at that. There was people around him, but I'm not sure if they were associated with him.
Did you see anyone that you felt was associated with him or accompanying him or anything like that?
Not that I recall, no.
You were shown a photograph which has been marked exhibit number 14, and you were asked to identify Mr. Rosenbaum, and you were asked about this person behind him. Do you have any idea who that was?
No, sir.
Do you recall seeing that person at any point on the night of August 25th?
No.
Could we please show an excerpt from exhibit 18? Mr. Lukowski, there is a female in this almost center of the video, a little center left, with a backpack on and a dark shirt and blue jeans. Do you see that person?
Yes.
Do you recall ever seeing that person on the night of August 25th?
No.
And I'll state for the record for the jury there's no dispute. That is Kelly Zeminski, and standing next to her is Joshua Zeminski, whose face can be seen here in exhibit number 40, just for the record. With regard to those two people that I've drawn your attention to, were they around Mr. Rosenbaum when Mr. Rosenbaum was stepping at you and saying the things he was saying? Do you recall?
Not that I recall.
You characterize Mr. Rosenbaum as the most aggressive person out there that night. Is that fair to say?
From my recollection, yes.
Did you ever see him physically harm anyone?
No.
Did you ever hear him threaten to physically harm anyone?
No.
At any point on the evening of August 25th, did you personally witness anyone physically harm anyone else?
No.
You mentioned that at one point you walked past the Ultimate gas station. And just so we're clear, the Ultimate gas station is right here on the southeast corner of 60th and Sheridan. Do you see where I'm pointing at?
Yes.
And you know, you're from, as you sit here today, you're familiar with that location? Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry.
Is that the location that you're talking about that you passed by at one point?
Yes.
What I want to ask is, where in the timeline did that occur?
Right when I got there. I had parked my vehicle on the one street over, and then I walked up. I think this is 60th.
Would you be able to use that pointer to show us what you just described?
I parked somewhere back here, And then I walked up 60th.
Okay. So you're pointing along what I think is 8th Avenue. Is that right, guys? 8th Avenue there by Library Park, and then walked up to 60th and headed west on 60th.
Yes.
And that was the only time in the evening when you passed by the that you stopped at the Ultimate gas station?
Yes.
The final thing I want to inquire about is the folks that were shouting as you encountered Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. Rittenhouse was running north on Sheridan. I think the one thing that you've described hearing is the words "get him." Is
Yes.
that right? Do you recall any other specific words that the crowd was saying?
No.
I'm going to try and ask you to put yourself back in the mindset of that night, at that moment when you heard that. Who did you think the him was?
I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Was it obvious to you that the him was the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse?
No.
At that moment in time, did you have any reason to believe that the defendant had shot anyone?
No.
Did you have any reason to believe that when people are shouting or pointing or doing whatever, that they were meaning the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse?
No.
I have no further questions.
Any recross?
I do, briefly. When you heard "get him," you didn't know that Mr. Rittenhouse had shot Mr. Rosenbaum, right?
Correct.
Okay. Would it be fair to say, though, whoever they were yelling "get him" to, that person had something to be concerned about?
Yes.
And Mr. Binger asked you, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum yell at anyone or threaten anyone, right?
Correct.
Okay. Did you hear anybody else demanding to be shot that evening other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
No.
Did you hear any other white people using racial epithets in the way that Mr. Rosenbaum was using them that evening?
Not that I can recall, no.
Now, I just want to clarify your statement to the FBI. Okay, when Kyle made contact with you, was that in the portion of your statement or your testimony where you don't have a good recollection of it? You had said you had blacked out. Was that during
After the meeting with that little meeting I guess I had with Kyle, and then I had followed him down, and I heard gunshots behind me, and then I had heard gunshots behind me once again. At that point, next thing I remember is seeing Gage.
Okay, so I'm not being critical about this, but you hear what you believe to be a rifle shots fired near 63rd and Sheridan.
Yes.
You see Kyle Rittenhouse running in your direction.
Yes.
You hear people yelling, "Get him."
Yes.
He tells you, whether he says, "I just shot somebody" or "I didn't shoot somebody, but I need help," at that point, you don't suspect that he may have been the person who shot someone?
It didn't cross my mind, no.
Is that in part because he wasn't aggressive during the night?
I'm going to object.
Correct.
This is beyond the scope.
Even if it is, I generally do not adhere strictly to that rule. So,
Is that part of, you wouldn't have a reason to believe he shot someone because he wasn't acting aggressive? When I say he, meaning Mr. Rittenhouse.
Correct.
My final question is this. As you sit here now and think about that statement, does it make more logical sense to you that he would have said that he shot somebody and he needs help versus he didn't shoot somebody but needs help?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. This is beyond the scope. It's been asked and answered, and the record is clear that this witness has testified to what the defendant has said.
why don't you rephrase your question?
Well,
And the first part, they asked and answered, as I said, we're here to develop the facts for the jury. And, we all have seen abuses where people lie back and hold their questions until they're into a redirect or a recross. But I haven't seen that from either side in this case, so I'm not going to swerve from my usual indulgence with these kinds of things. But on the second point, I think the question should be restructured.
So I know that you've testified about what you believe you heard that night, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what I'm asking that you do is, have you looked at your statement since you gave it? Have you ever read your statement?
A few days ago, and then in the court.
Who had you read your statement?
Myself.
Who gave it to you? Sorry.
I did.
Okay. So you met with Mr. Binger?
Yes.
I want to be clear. Is
Sorry.
this his statement or a statement, a summary made by the FBI?
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
So the statement that Mr. Binger provided to you was a statement written by the FBI saying what you told them?
Yes.
Okay. So remembering that, now my question to you was this. Having read that statement, and the portion I'm talking about is what Kyle said to you, does it make more logical sense to you today, or when you had, and he can shake his head if he wants, while you're sitting here now, why would he need help if he didn't shoot someone?
I'm going to object.
Argumentative.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
I have one final question, Your Honor. Mr. Wachowski, you said you didn't think the get him was aimed at Mr. Rittenhouse, right?
Yes.
At that moment in time, you didn't think Mr. Rittenhouse shot anybody because he said he didn't shoot anybody, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, then you may step down, sir. You mean they don't just fax those?
Call Amber Rasmussen.
Yeah, if I send you notes.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony about to give this matter be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. You may be seated.
Can you please state your name and spell it for the benefit of the court reporter?
Amber Rasmussen, AMBER RASMUSSEN.
And where are you employed?
I am employed at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Milwaukee.
And what is your position there?
I am a DNA analyst in the DNA analysis unit.
And how long have you been a DNA analyst?
I have been employed as a DNA analyst for just over 10 years.
And what is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology and Human Biology from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, as well as a Master's of Science in Forensic Science from Marshall University.
And what are your primary duties as a forensic scientist in DNA analysis?
As a DNA analyst, we will receive evidence, analyze that evidence for any possible biological materials, attempt to develop a DNA profile from that evidence, make any comparisons to known individuals, write a report on our findings, and testify to those findings in court if needed.
And have you received any specialized training in the areas of DNA analysis?
Yes, in addition to my education, I also received approximately 9 months of on-the-job training prior to being signed off as a full DNA analyst. I also undergo annual training and review current literature.
And are you a member of any professional organizations related to forensic science?
Yes, I am a member of both the Midwest Association of Forensic Science as well as the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And is your laboratory accredited by any organization?
Yes, we are accredited by ANAB, which is an acronym for another acronym, but it is American National Accreditation Board, ASQ, National Accreditation Board.
And is there any sort of proficiency testing or peer reviewing that you participate at your laboratory?
Yes, we participate in both proficiency testing and peer review. Proficiency testing is when an external company provides us a test with known results, and we work that test as if it were a case and send our results back to them, and they verify that we obtain the correct results on that case. Peer review or technical review is when another analyst evaluates our work and work we did on a case, and they review every case. Another trained analyst will review every case that we work within the lab.
And what actually is what people commonly refer to as DNA? What actually is it?
DNA is often referred to as the building block of life. It is present in all living things. It is the same throughout your body. It is unique to each individual except for identical twins, and it's what makes you who you are. It's what makes you a human. It's what determines your genetic characteristics.
And how do you test for DNA, or what's the process you use?
So for forensic testing, we look at areas of DNA that aren't typically associated with physical characteristics. They are areas often referred to as junk DNA, but we have found these areas that vary from individual to individual, and one individual may have the same DNA type at a location as another, but when we look at multiple types, that will vary from person to person, and we can use that totality of DNA types within an individual's DNA profile to differentiate between DNA from different people.
Now, when I read these reports, there's something called an STR. What is an STR?
An STR is a specific reference to the type of DNA we look at. STR stands for short tandem repeat, which is the small repeated sequences of DNA that we use for our analysis.
And is that kind of analysis a commonly or generally accepted procedure in forensic science?
Yes, it is.
And how do you go about doing a STR DNA analysis?
So first we will take an item of evidence, whether it is swabs or clothing, and we will take a sample from that item, and we will subject that sample to a series of reagents in order to break open any cells that may be present, clean up that sample from anything that is not DNA, and end up with a small volume of liquid that contains purified DNA. We will then take that small sample and count how much DNA is present and run it through our system to make copies of those areas that we use in our analysis.
Now, I've placed a document in front of you that has been labeled in another way, Exhibit 22. Can you please take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize it?
Is this the document?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, this is a copy of my confidential report of laboratory findings for laboratory case R20-2992, dated June 25th, 2021. And I can tell that it is my report because there is my signature on the first page and my initials on each subsequent page.
So, did you review that report before coming to testify today?
Yes.
And is this, as far as you can, is this a true and accurate copy of your report?
Yes.
I'd like to move Exhibit 22 into evidence. Now, in this case, is this case related to the Kyle Rittenhouse? This report related to the Kyle Rittenhouse case?
Yes.
And what did you receive to test for DNA in this case?
In this case, we received 3 sets of swabs from a firearm, 2 sets of swabs from an ammunition magazine, and 3 standard or reference samples from known individuals.
What is a standard or reference sample?
A standard or reference is a sample that is directly collected from a person, and we use that to establish what that individual's DNA profile is, and we can then use that for comparison to any questioned evidentiary profiles we obtain.
And the 3 standards in this case you received from Joseph Rosenbaum, Anthony Huber, and Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Now, Kyle Rittenhouse's standards is called a buccal swab. What is that?
A buccal swab is a swab of the buccal cells, which are the inside of your cheek, contains buccal swabs. So these are basically swabs that are taken from the inside of a person's mouth.
And the ones from Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Huber are dried blood standards. What are those?
Dried blood standards are when blood is applied to usually a card, and then we can take a sample of that blood to develop a profile.
So you can get the DNA from the dried blood.
Yes.
And you talked about swabs from a firearm and from some ammunition magazines. Can you describe how that process is done?
Which part of the process?
I'm sorry. What do you mean by swabs? Like, what do you actually receive?
So in this case, what was received were envelopes containing swab boxes, which are small boxes that contain basically a wooden stick with cotton on the end, a long-handled Q-tip. And each of those boxes was marked as having been collected from a different area of either the firearm or from a magazine. In this case, there was 1 set of swabs marked as having been collected from a trigger, another from a barrel guard, and another from a pistol grip, and then 2 sets from a magazine. And what we do is we will cut off the cotton portion of that swab, and that is what proceeds in our testing to try to develop a DNA profile.
So is it your understanding that someone would have taken that swab, swabbed the parts or the items that are listed, and then packaged it up and sent them to you?
Yes.
So it's being represented to you that the gun has been swabbed by these Q-tips?
Yes.
Or not technically a Q-tip, but... Now, did you find any DNA on any of those swabs?
Yes.
Where did you find DNA?
There was DNA detected on all 5 of those evidentiary items.
And what did you do once DNA was detected?
I attempted to develop a profile from each of those, and then attempted to interpret those profiles and make any comparisons to those.
Now, for the trigger swab, was there any DNA found from the trigger swab?
Yes.
And who was the source of that DNA?
A single source male profile was obtained from the swabs from the trigger, and Kyle Rittenhouse is the source of that DNA profile.
Now, the next finding is swabs from the barrel guard. Is that a part of a gun?
Yes.
And what were the findings on the barrel guard?
The barrel guard contained a mixture of DNA, so there was DNA present from at least 2 people. This contained DNA from at least 1 male. And assuming that there were 2 people present, I was able to do a comparison to each of the 3 different individuals in this case. Would you like me to read those results as well?
Let me ask you one question before you do that. You said you used a process or a procedure called STR mix. Just briefly, what is that?
STR mix is a software program that helps us to interpret DNA and analyze DNA profiles, and it also helps to perform comparisons to the DNA profiles.
Is this the standard you use when there are potential mixtures?
It is most often used for mixtures, yes.
Is it the only thing your lab uses for mixtures now?
We do, in certain cases, we do have, we can not use this software and we can do a manual interpretation.
Now, what were your findings on the barrel guard?
For the barrel guard, this was a two-person mixture, and assuming there are two people present, we compared two different hypotheses or propositions or explanations for the data. The first explanation is that this DNA profile came from the person of interest in an unknown individual, and the second is it came from two unknown individuals. So in this case, there were three different persons of interest, which were each compared separately to that mixture profile. There was strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 70,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than it is a mixture resulting from Joseph Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. There is very strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber in this mixture. It is at least 2 billion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals than Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual. And there is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
So am I understanding that there's strong support to exclude Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber on that DNA DNA analysis, but very strong support to include Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Now, were the next item is the swabs from the pistol grip. What were the results from that? And was that also with the STR mix?
This was also a two-person mixture, including at least one male, and it was also interpreted using the StarMix software.
So, what were the findings on that item?
Because this was a two-person mixture, our possible explanations are the same. We have either the person of interest in an unknown or two unknown individuals. And for the pistol grip, there is strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 657,000 times more likely to observe this profile if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture resulting from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and another unknown individual. There is strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber. It is at least 13,000 times more likely to observe this profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual. And there is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals.
Is it fair to say that's essentially the same findings as the swabs from the barrel guard, but the numbers and the likelihoods are different?
They are similar conclusions, yes.
Okay. Now, the next item is the magazine swabs. What were your findings from the magazine swabs?
There were 2 sets of magazine swabs submitted in this case. The first set was a low-level 2-person mixture that contained DNA from at least one male. And this was also interpreted with StarMix.
And what were the results?
There is moderate support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 2,670 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. The conclusion was uninformative for Anthony M. Huber. The statistical value generated for his comparison has been seen for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known not to be included. So our laboratory will not make a conclusion in this statistical range. There is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
Now, so in terms of Mr. Huber, you cannot either exclude or include him?
Correct. The amount of DNA present from the second contributor, and this is a low-level mixture, there was less information present, so we are less able to make a definitive answer one way or another.
What is a low-level mixture?
Low level just means that there isn't much DNA present, or not our ideal amount of DNA for performing an interpretation. So there is less DNA than a full profile from all of the contributors to the mixture.
Does there have to be a certain amount or a certain quality of DNA present in order for your laboratory to continue with testing?
We have a threshold where, so we count how, I mentioned earlier, we count how much DNA is in a sample, and we have a threshold where we have determined we may get results. Anything below that does not continue in our laboratory process. But as far as once results are generated, we will see if we can make comparisons. Sometimes there isn't enough data to make comparisons.
Now, the last item here is the second set of magazine swabs. What were the findings there?
This was also a low-level two-person mixture with at least one male present, and this was also interpreted using the StarMix software.
And again, what were the findings?
The presence of Joseph D. Rosenbaum's DNA within this mixture was uninformative. Statistical values in this range have been observed for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known to not be included in a mixture. So we will not make a conclusion regarding his presence of DNA in the mixture. Anthony M. Huber was also uninformative. Statistical values such as those obtained for his profile are inconclusive, and we will not make a conclusion. And Kyle H. Rittenhouse, there was strong support for inclusion of his profile within the mixture. It is at least 874,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
What is touch DNA?
Touch DNA is the term that is often used to refer to the DNA that is transferred to an item when a person touches or handles it.
And is it more or less likely to transfer DNA in a touch DNA situation than, say, if bleeding onto an item?
Body fluids are a definite source and good source of DNA. Touch DNA will vary greatly in the amount of DNA contained in the resulting sample. It will vary based on how long the object was handled, how much friction or pressure was involved, how recently that individual had washed their hands, if they had touched their face prior to touching the item. There are quite a number of factors. So touch DNA has much more variance in the quality of DNA obtained.
So, assuming your hand is not bleeding or doesn't have any sort of other bodily fluid on it, what kind of cells would you be expecting to find if it's touch DNA? Like, from where in the body or what fluids in the body?
Touch DNA is often from skin cells or transferred from, as I said, usually touching your face is the most likely source of DNA, or touching any other items may also be a secondary transfer of DNA.
So if I touch this television here briefly, I may or may not leave DNA behind on it.
You probably left DNA behind. Whether it was enough to be detectable via our methods is a different question.
But if I sat here and touched it for a longer period of time, or if my hands were particularly sweaty, would it be fair to say that it'd be more likely there'd be enough DNA to test?
Yes.
Now, we in the courtroom have seen a video that shows Mr. Huber making contact with the firearm that was in question here. How could it be that Mr. Huber makes contact with the firearm and does not leave DNA behind?
As far as leaving DNA behind or being detected on the samples we received, touch DNA, again, can vary. There may have been very little DNA on his hands when he handled that object. It may have been wiped away later. The sample may have been exposed to heat or moisture or undergone a duration of time before it was collected, and all of those things will limit the amount of DNA that can be detected.
Is it true, let me ask it this way, does your lab have restrictions on what they will accept in terms of items for simply touch DNA analysis?
Yes.
And why is that, to the best of your knowledge?
We have submission guidelines for touch DNA items. They are less likely to result in usable DNA profiles, and we will not accept touch DNA items on nonviolent cases.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-exam.
Can I ask you, Ms. Rasmussen, when you get a sample to be tested, who tells you what area, in this case, so there's a firearm, right? You test?
The DNA unit did not receive the firearm itself in this case.
What did you receive?
We received swabs that were collected from a firearm.
Okay. And so when law enforcement sends those to you, they tell you this swab was taken from this area of the firearm or this area of the firearm, and we'd like you to test it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that you never got a swab from the barrel of that gun?
The barrel guard was the closest, to my knowledge, that was obtained from the barrel of the gun.
Do you know what a barrel guard is?
I do not.
Okay. You'd agree, however, it's listed barrel guard. There's nothing on here listing barrel of gun.
Correct.
Okay. So if, for example, Joseph Rosenbaum touched the barrel of that gun, we'll never know that, right?
I have no way of determining it.
Because it wasn't sent to you for analysis, right?
Yes.
Now, Jim. Mr. Rasmussen, I'm going to show you what has been marked exhibits 45 and 46 for identification. I just would like if you can tell me what you see in those exhibits.
In Exhibit 45, I see a person walking the opposite direction of whoever's taking the photo, and a person on the ground, and there's an object connecting them. The person on the ground appears to be holding on to the object.
Okay. Jim, can you tell me if you agree? No disagreement that the person on the ground is Mr. Rittenhouse? No disagreement that the person standing up is Mr. Huber?
No disagreement.
No disagreement that the object in between them is a firearm?
No disagreement.
Okay. So, Mr. Rasmussen, if I told you that person standing there is Anthony Huber, okay, that we agree on that, you agree that it appears Anthony Huber is touching that, and we agree that's a gun. You'd agree that Anthony Huber is touching that gun, right? It appears to be he's touching that gun?
It appears to be.
Okay. Now, in the areas, so the fact there's no DNA present in the areas you were asked to look at doesn't mean that the person didn't actually touch the firearm. We see it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The DNA, yeah, correct.
Okay. Can you do the other one, please? So if I told you that's a different angle, that's Mr. Rittenhouse on the ground, that's Mr. Huber holding the skateboard, and that's a firearm, you'd agree it appears that Mr. Huber is touching that firearm. Would you agree with that?
That appears to be the case.
Okay. And so the fact that, I don't know where that is on the gun, but the fact that the DNA isn't there, and everybody thinks DNA is this thing that proves everything, you'd agree that we can see he's actually touching the firearm.
What is your question?
Well, the fact that it's not present and I don't know where on the gun that is, but the fact that DNA is not present in any of the areas of the firearm for Mr. Huber doesn't mean that he didn't actually touch it.
Correct. Whether DNA was detected from an individual or not does not mean that they did not touch that item.
And I think you said, and tell me if I have this right, the shorter amount of time someone touches something, the less likely there'll be DNA which you can compare or find.
Yes, the less an item is handled, the less I would expect there to be an opportunity for DNA to transfer.
Was there ever a follow-up request by law enforcement to test any other areas of that gun?
Not to my knowledge. That may not have gone directly to me, though it may have been to someone else at the crime laboratory.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, I don't remember the numbers. I'd move 40, is it 45 and 46 now?
Yes.
I'd move 45 and 46, if there's no objection.
No.
And I have no other questions. Thank you for your time, ma'am.
Any read back?
No.
Let me step down, ma'am. I haven't heard anything about food, so we'll just keep. Mr. Mayor?
Would you like me to leave this here?
Yeah, well, here.
We have it digitally that will submit.
Okay. Although actually, unless you need it, well, go ahead, do it.
Oh, you can have it. We have
No.
1,000 copies of it if you want it.
Let's fight over it.
Shall we continue? Jim?
Please.
Okay. This name called Susan Hughes, this thing?
What was that? Push that mic aside.
Raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Ma'am, could you please state and spell your name for the benefit of the court reporter?
Susan Hughes, Hughes.
Ms. Hughes, did you know Anthony Huber?
Yes,
How did you know him?
I am his great aunt.
And
His grandmother was my oldest sister.
And how did you come to know Anthony?
Well, my niece is his mother.
So did you know him from when he was a child?
Yes.
And would you have considered yourself close to Mr. Huber?
Yeah, even when he was a child, we had kind of a special connection. But I was born in Kenosha. I moved away, came back in 2011, and from that time, we became even closer.
Now, you said you had a special connection. What do you mean by that?
He was a redhead. I used to be a redhead. He was, his immediate family, they were all blondes. So he kind of gravitated to me at family gatherings and things, even though when he was a child, I really only saw him, holidays and when I visited Kenosha, so, 4 or 5 times a year. But even then he would gravitate towards me because I could talk to him about things he was interested in. I mean, we shared interests in art and music and computers, Star Wars, things that little boys like to talk about.
So you said you would see him in Kenosha. Did Anthony grow up in Kenosha?
Yes, he was born here and went to school here.
Do you know if what any schools he attended here?
Well, he's in the Southport neighborhood, so I think he went there perhaps. I know he was at St. Mark's for a while. And I don't know, would those kids go to Lance maybe for middle school? I'm not sure. I was living in Madison, so I wasn't real connected to what schools he was going to.
So in 2011, you said you moved back to the Kenosha area?
Yes.
And you said you became more close. What do you mean by that?
Well, from that point, I moved back because I had health issues, and both of my sisters did, so I was seeing his grandmother quite frequently. And Anthony was very close to his grandmother, so I would see him sometimes, once or twice a week. He would call her frequently. She moved in with me actually in 2013, and from that point, we saw Anthony even more. He frequently needed rides to jobs and things, and when she wasn't able to take him, I would take him.
And about how old would Anthony be in this time period?
Well, when I moved back,
adult,
I think he was like 17, maybe, when I moved back here.
And even back then, did you ever know Anthony Huber to use a skateboard?
Always, always. The skateboard, I must confess, was kind of an annoyance to me because he would, when I first moved back here in 2011, we had a family gathering. We had a dinner in the winter, and I lived close to Penoyer Park. And Anthony arrived in a car. There was a foot of snow on the ground. He walked into my house with a skateboard and was going to, skate on my laminated floors. And I said, "You can't skate in the house, and where are you going to skate anyway? Because there's snow on the ground." And he, picked up his skateboard. He went out and he found a place to skate in the snow. I mean, he always, even shortly before he died, when I would take him somewhere, he would know I was picking him up in a car. He was going to go home in a car. He would still have the skateboard in case there was a chance, there was an interesting parking lot somewhere, and he could go out and skate.
To the best of your knowledge, was that his main mode of transportation if he wasn't getting rides from you or someone else?
Yes, he skated sometimes to jobs if I wasn't available to take him there, or one of his friends. He would skate home frequently, quite long distances. Some of the temp jobs that he had were out by Jelly Belly and out by I-94, if people don't know where that is. Anton's, I mean, that's like Cooper Road or something. And so miles he would go on a skateboard.
And was this a hobby of his? Would he compete in skateboarding events to the extent you know?
That I don't know. I was a sometimes supporter of his habit.
Okay.
So, he would talk to me a lot about it. He would send me videos and things, but I really didn't follow whether he was competing. I know when he was younger, meaning 18, 19, he was actively looking for sponsors and things. I mean, that was something he was interested in, but that never materialized.
No, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Oh, and I know that as he got older, one of his pipe dreams, he had told me, was that he had a vision for an indoor skate park downtown Kenosha, and
So skateboarding was central to his character. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Now I'd like to draw your attention or bring you to late August of 2020. Were you living in Kenosha at that time?
Yes.
And are you aware of the shooting of Jacob Blake and the events that followed that shooting?
Yes.
And during that time frame, did Mr. Huber contact you?
Yes.
And when's the first time did you guys have like daily contact, or how did this come about?
Well, that whole weekend, a few days before and then certainly after Jacob was shot, we had frequent contact during that period.
And did Mr. Huber have any special interest in the Jacob Blake shooting or the events that followed?
Yes.
And what was that special interest?
He told me that he knew Jacob. We had Anthony would sometimes want to go with me out to Petrifying Springs. There's a memorial bench there that is dedicated to my son who passed away. And after Jacob was shot, Anthony wanted to go out there with me. And while we were there, he told me he had known Jacob. I frankly don't recall how well he knew him. I mean, it just sticks in my memory that he said he knew him. That was the reason why we went out that day. He knew that Jacob had children. He knew, I remember him mentioning a few things about Jacob's life.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Did you know Jacob Blake?
I did not.
All right. Now, so what day did you go to this? You said a memorial bench for your son? Mm-hmm. And was that someone that Anthony Huber was close to?
Yes.
And what day did you go to this memorial bench?
I believe it was Monday.
And that's when he told you about that he knew Jacob Blake, and you discussed his feelings about the protests and all that.
Yes.
Do you know if he had gone out on any any night to engage in a protest?
I know he had gone. He had taken his phone. He told me he was just wanting to take some videos.
Now, it's been established that Anthony died on the late night of August 25th. Did you see him anytime that day?
Yes.
Why did you see him?
He stopped with Hannah late in the afternoon, maybe 3:30, 4 o'clock. They were on their way to do a lot of errands, and he stopped to, I think I gave him some mail, and he was on his way to a cell phone store. I gave him some cash because he needed to resolve some things with his cell phone.
Now, is this something that you would do? Would you occasionally give him money?
Mm-hmm.
And did he have a driver's license? Did he know how to drive?
Yeah, he got his driver's license the day of his birthday, the Friday before.
Okay. And who would go practice driving with him and things of that nature?
That was me.
You mentioned a Hannah. Who's Hannah?
Hannah was his girlfriend.
So, Do you recall approximately what time of day that you saw Anthony that on August 25th?
Like I said, I think 3:30, 4 o'clock. I remember it being later in the afternoon because we had a conversation about the traffic, and I reminded him he needed to get back in town before curfew.
And then with that, did they depart?
Yeah.
And was
no, excuse me. Was that the? Can you repeat that question?
Then they left after you said be back by curfew. Is that then
Yeah.
they left to go
Yeah.
to the store,
Yeah.
or wherever they went? Was Hannah driving at that point?
I think it was Hannah's car, but Anthony was driving.
Now, we've seen video here, and you may have seen video as well, that Anthony Huber ran towards Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, Kyle Rittenhouse was armed. Were you surprised when you heard about that? Were you surprised by his actions?
Sustained.
Had you ever seen Anthony Huber run towards danger?
Yes.
Sustained.
As to which ground?
Both. Well, maybe, certainly on the second ground. Habit or custom.
We've heard nothing but having a custom evidence in this case.
Pardon me?
We've heard nothing but having a custom evidence. I think I can rehabilitate.
Well, first off, you don't need to comment on the ruling. Secondly, they're different rules. And we've been talking about this all along. There are different rules. Let's take a break. Please don't talk about the case. Lunch is here. And read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. And we'll aim for about 12:30. Pardon me? What do you want to say, Mr. Krause?
Judge. Judge, I'd like to direct your attention to 90404 sub B. The character of the victim offered by an accused or by prosecution to rebut the same, or evidence of a character trait of peacefulness of the victim offered by the prosecution in a homicide case to rebut evidence that the victim was the first aggressor. We are rebutting the evidence and characterization that's been made both in opening statements and in cross-examination that Anthony Huber was attacking, being the aggressor against Kyle Rittenhouse for seemingly no reason. This is what the defense says.
Do you want to respond?
Well, the response is there's been evidence that Mr. Huber, while Mr. Rittenhouse was on the ground, struck him in the head with a skateboard. So I think that goes to, if I can here, I don't know if that rebuts evidence that the victim was the aggressor. aggressor when it's really just a fact on video that in fact he did strike him in the head with a skateboard prior to being, and then grabbed his weapon prior to being shot. So I guess the court has to make a determination whether or not the evidence that's been put into the record up to this point would support the idea that we're just saying watch the video, which clearly shows what Mr. Huber had done to, I think it goes, Mr. Rosenbaum was, I think the question is, we've alleged that he's the aggressor here. Mr. Huber, his acts speak for themselves in terms of what he did.
So you're indicating that Anthony Huber was not an aggressor?
I'm saying that the evidence shows that Anthony Huber swung a skateboard at the defendant's head. Then he hit him in the back of the head with a skateboard while he was lying on the ground. Then he grabbed his firearm. That's what I'm alleging.
I guess what I'm struggling with. Oh, did you want to say something?
Yes, that's precisely why we have this.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
This is precisely why this rule is here. They are alleging that Anthony Huber attempted to strike Kyle Rittenhouse with the skateboard, missed, and then came and we would say did not strike him with the skateboard, perhaps attempted to strike, but came at him with the skateboard and grabbed the weapon. They are calling him the first aggressor, although now they're apparently not. So we can rebut that evidence, and our theory, as we've laid out, is that these people were going to stop an active shooter, that they were provoked by Kyle Rittenhouse, by his actions with Mr. Rosenbaum, that his actions there were of such provocation as they believed he was an active shooter, he was a danger to all of them. The state frankly believes that Mr. Huber is a hero, and that we can present evidence of conduct to rebut this claim that he is aggressively pursuing Kyle Rittenhouse with no basis, which is exactly what they're saying. Mr. Trofsky just laid out the evidence that they have called Mr. Huber the first aggressor against Mr. Rittenhouse. Okay. We can rebut that.
Okay. With respect to Mr. Rosenbaum, the defense has definitely suggested and presented evidence that Mr. Rosenbaum was a turbulent personality and was acting in an aggressive manner, and that is certainly a pertinent trait of character in terms of the question as to who was the first aggressor in the incident between them. I didn't hear a similar attack on Mr. Huber, as I think Mr. Sharafi has just stated. What the defense has offered with respect to Mr. Sharafi is direct evidence that Mr. Huber did actions that the jury actually has the unique benefit in this case that we wouldn't see in 1 in 100 cases, or even that, where they can actually see the action. So the evidence that you're offering now is character type evidence, which is really not directly rebutting the physical acts which the jury has been able to observe, as opposed to the case of the Rosenbaum evidence, where they've not seen the act and there was evidence introduced as to turbulent character. So it's rebuttive. Is that a word, rebuttive?
I don't believe so.
Well, let's call it rebuttalistic. As to the...
I think that's twice now a word.
But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to think about it during the break and read what Judge Weinstein and other commentators have to say, and then it's an interesting point. But my initial suspicion is that this doesn't rebut with the acts which the jury is able to see, because and the statute makes reference to and offered by the prosecution. Where is it here? Offered by the prosecution in a homicide case to rebut Evidence that the victim was the first aggressor.
That's precisely what they presented. If they want to stipulate that Mr. Huber was not the first aggressor in terms of his interaction with Mr. Rittenhouse, I think we'll gladly accept that stipulation.
What did they show? What has the defense offered?
In the opening,
in argument or in either an argument here during the case or an opening or in the evidence, what did they offer on the subject of aggression by Mr. Huber other than the act with respect to the skateboard and any effort he may have made to de-weaponize the accused?
In terms, all we know, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, the only interaction that I'm aware of between Mr. Huber and Mr. Rittenhouse that night, there may be some pictures where they're sort of seen in close proximity, but the only interaction that I'm aware of between the two is you see Mr. Huber, I believe this was an opening, sort of focuses attention on Mr. Rittenhouse, begin running that way. He either swings and loses his grip on the skateboard or throws the skateboard at Mr. Rittenhouse. It goes to the other side of the road. He then goes and retrieves the skateboard and then goes back towards Mr. Rittenhouse. So I don't see how that is not the defense calling him the first aggressor. It doesn't have to go back all through the night like they've been allowed to do with Mr. Rosenbaum. They are saying, unless they are agreeing that Mr. Rittenhouse was the first aggressor, they are saying he was the first aggressor by throwing a skateboard at him and trying to hit him with a skateboard.
Okay.
So we can rebut that. According to the statute, it's plain language in the statute.
Well, I'm gonna see what the commentaries say. We'll take a look. Why don't you come back about 12:25 if you can? Oh, all right, 12:30. 12:30. Aren't you a light eater like me?
Judge, do you mind if I take this out of your courtroom?
You may take it, as long as you promise to return it.
Well, of course.
We're gonna 12:30.
That's real time.
Yeah, you got it. So you got about 33, isn't it? All right.